Hey guys, how's it going? Oh my gosh, it has been busy around here. I'm sure you've seen in the last vlog how much snow we got. Unfortunately, all of that snow has put us so behind, like probably a week behind on all of the stuff we need to get done for the holidays. And unfortunately, I haven't had the free time to go around and do fun Christmas stuff, which is a bummer because I really wanted to take you guys to see some Christmas lights, which I still am going to try to squeeze in. I'm hoping the video of that might actually come after Christmas, but I'm still hoping to do it. We've been so busy, we had to catch up on our Christmas shopping. The 2 days it snowed was, of course, our 2 days off to get all of the stuff done. And my store closed down for the weekend, and Chelsea Gasley's work, she actually had to go into work over the weekend. So we're just so far behind. Anyway, the original point of this video is, well, I wasn't going or planning to do anything for Vlogmas. There are tons of great vlogs out there doing Vlogmas stuff, like Adventures with Extra Magic and Pixie Dust Productions, Disney Being Leo. They're doing great Vlogmas stuff, and everyone's doing it so well that I wasn't going to. But I decided, since I wasn't able to get out and do a video last weekend, that I would do 2 or 3 smaller, shorter videos, and I'll just toss them up on the YouTube page. Yeah, so I thought it'd be fun to make a couple small videos of what I like about the holidays. Let's do some Vlogmas. Hello, and welcome to my first Vlogmas video. This is going to be kind of odd for me, because I'm so used to taking you guys out and about and showing you fun stuff and editing videos together that I rarely kind of sit down and offer up some kind of quasi-scripted video here on YouTube. I say quasi-scripted because I have notes. So I made it no secret, if you go back and watch past vlogs, that I'm part of a paranormal group. Ideas in the paranormal really interest me. And for a number of reasons that I won't get into right now. You can go back and watch all the older vlogs. But I am part of a paranormal group called Paranormal Georgia Investigations. And for the month of December, I wrote an article for our website about the history of the Victorian ghost story and why it became a big tradition in the Victorian era around Christmas time. Families would gather around the fire on Christmas Eve and just trade ghost stories. So I kind of decided that I wanted to take this blog post and do kind of a short video about, I don't want to call it a video essay, that just sounds boring. And I've written a lot of essays, so it's kind of boring. But just this informative video of the history of how the Victorians incorporated ghost stories into their Christmas tradition. So without further ado, the Victorian ghost story, a Christmas tradition. Because you know who really likes a good ghost story? Between the months of November and December, Christmas music is everywhere. You can't escape it, stores play it, and a lot of people don't like it. But there is a classic standard from 1963 from singer Andy Williams. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's the name of the song. But in that song, there's a very interesting line that doesn't really fit with the rest of your Americanized or Westernized version of what Christmas is. And that line is, "There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago." Scary ghost stories seems like a really out of place line. Ghost stories? Huh. Well, it turns out that Andy Williams was singing about an old Victorian tradition that has not really carried over to the modern American Christmas, but is still kind of big over in England. In order to understand the ghost story Christmas tradition, we have to understand the era in which it had its springboard, which was the Victorian era. So we kind of have to ask ourselves 2 questions. Who are the Victorians, and why ghost stories at Christmas? The phrase, the Victorians, are used primarily to describe a people in a certain era in England's history, and that's under the rule of Queen Victoria from 1837 to roughly about 1901. It should be noted that the Victorians didn't invent the ghost story. They kind of perfected it. So what was going on with the Victorians during this time? Well, there was a lot of stuff going on. So the other question we have to ask ourselves is, why Christmas for ghost stories? It seems like ghost stories would be more in line with Halloween, which is celebrated 2 months prior to Christmas. The ancient Celts in England had their Halloween festivities. They celebrated Samhain, and Samhain to the Celts was the day where the veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest, and you could potentially interact with spirits. So it doesn't really seem very fitting that the ghost story would go for Christmas more so than it would go for Halloween or the Celtic Samhain. So what else was going on with the Victorians, and specifically the Victorian Christmas? Christmas was kind of going through a reboot, and that's largely due to the Industrial Revolution. Cities started to grow, and there was more work in cities, so a lot of families from outside the city limits would start to move in, and they would actually go to the factories and start to work. Before this, a lot of families had children in order to help man the farm. But now, since industrialization was happening, they didn't have children for work-related purposes. And since they were just having children to have children, the family dynamic started to change. It really started to become a family holiday. So before we go into ghost stories, let's talk about end of the year celebrations. Now we're going to time jump back in time a little bit for this, and I promise this all makes sense at the end. The Celts really celebrated the winter solstice. It was their end of the year celebration. They all huddled around a fire to be with one another and tell stories and basically just keep together. The Norse actually had a festival by the name of Yule. Going towards the end of the year, the nights start to get longer and the days start to get shorter. Now for the ancient people, this was a very big deal, especially so far north up in Norway and even in Celtic England. The nights would start to get dark probably around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It would be pitch black for a really long time. This became a very scary time of year for those cultures because the darkness really represented uncertainty and mystery and the unknown. In order to combat the unknown, they would gather close together by a fire and they would tell stories. In the Norse tradition, people were scared to go outside because they believed Odin would come and smite them and smack them down if they were just a bad person. So they were really scared of spirits and deities being outside after dark, out in the woods. You don't know what's out there, so you're scared of it. It's the fear of the unknown. This concept of fear of the unknown and this encroaching darkness for this time of year, this wasn't lost on the Victorians. This is something that they were well aware of. Death was on the minds of Victorians, and it's the symbolism of the seasons, right? During the winter, everything dies, and in the spring, everything grows again. In the summer, it flourishes, and then the fall, it starts to decay, and in the winter, it dies. So death is very fresh in the minds of the people around this time of year. So let's go back to who the Victorians were and how they lived their life. The Victorians were actually a quite religious people. They were either Catholic or Protestant, and ghosts were something that they were kind of taught to fear. That would slowly change during the course of the Victorian era. But something else that was going on in the Victorian era was scientific discoveries about how the world works were just making leaps and bounds in discoveries. People like Charles Darwin were coming up with theories of evolution which really questioned people's religious, I don't want to say religious morals, but I guess religious mindset. Let's talk about one of the biggest things that happened in the Victorian era, which really plays into the Victorian idea of the ghost story, and that's called the Spiritualist movement. Spiritualism is a belief system where one believes we can make contact with the spirits of the deceased. And this is something that took the world by storm in 1848, and it really has its roots with two little girls known as the Fox sisters. The Fox sisters in upstate New York claimed that they can speak to the spirit world through a series of knocks. They would talk to whoever may or may not be there, and as a response, they would get rappings on the wall, or what sounded like an echo of a knock. People bought into this completely, and as did their older sister. Their older sister actually took them on the road, and they became this traveling show, this amazing spectacle. The Fox sisters can talk to spirits. Later on, one of the Fox sisters came forward and said, no, it was actually a hoax. We can't talk to spirits. And one of them claimed that it was actually one of them, the knocks, they were creating the knocks, or these pops, or these rappings, by popping a bone in their foot. Like they could just kind of squeeze their muscle and a bone would pop. So that's how they would produce these knocking sounds. Now, years later, another Fox sister stepped forward and said that was a hoax. So to this day, we don't know. It's more than likely a hoax. One of them claims that it was, one of them claims that it wasn't. Still up in the air. Now, whether or not the Fox sisters were a hoax or true, that's not important. What is important is that they springboarded this idea of what would become the spiritualist movement. After this, it became kind of like this really new fad to visit mediums or talk to psychics and have seances. So whenever people of means would get together, they would hire a medium to come in and they would all sit and have a seance and try to communicate with the dead. It was seen as a form of entertainment, but a lot of people really bought into this idea, and a lot of people made their living on being a medium, a lot of which were hoaxes, or a psychic. A lot of people claiming to have this sixth sense to speak with the spirits. And of course, it wasn't without its counter movement. There were a lot of people who were trying to debunk these mediums, but the important point of the spiritualist movement is that it exploded all over the Western world. This wasn't lost on a lot of people in Victorian England. As a matter of fact, it definitely wasn't lost on a lot of authors at the time. Because we're trying to make contact with spirits in the real world, this started to get reflected in their art. A lot of ghost stories started to pop out of the Victorian era, probably due to what was going on in the culture of the spiritualist movement. I said earlier that the Victorians didn't invent the ghost story. And that's true. Ghost stories go all the way back to antiquity. Pick up a Greek mythology book. There are tons of ghost stories there. But they really perfected it in this era. It's something that really rang true with what was going on with the culture of the Victorians, especially in England. Something that I find very interesting about the Victorian ghost story is its characteristics. It's typically centered on a person who has an interaction with spirits. And the spirits aren't necessarily evil. As a matter of fact, they're very cautionary. They try to help the person, whether that be from an antagonist in the story or maybe even themselves. And we see this in what is quite possibly not only the most popular Christmas story, but the most popular ghost story, and that is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. We have the character of Ebenezer Scrooge, who is this curmudgeon. I mean, that's where we get the phrase, that guy's being a Scrooge, from old Ebenezer here. Ebenezer is kind of a greedy money grubber, and he doesn't care about anyone else but himself. He's very cheap, he pinches pennies, and it's through a series of visitations through ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come, that Scrooge starts to see the error of his ways. And the ghosts really start to teach Ebenezer Scrooge about himself, so he can essentially see the light, see the error of his ways. And this is something that it's not evident in every ghost story, but it's a main characteristic in a lot of ghost stories. So what's so important about A Christmas Carol is that it had two things going for it. Not only was it a great ghost story, but it also took place during Christmas. They don't have to be Christmas themed, but it was good fortune that this story was, which kind of springboarded this tradition of telling ghost stories at Christmas time. We might not tell ghost stories as part of a modern Christmas tradition, but the ghosts of Christmas past still do kind of linger. Just ask Andy Williams. So if you guys are interested in reading more Victorian ghost stories, I have some suggestions for you. Obviously, Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. He's written a number of other ghost stories as well. Not necessarily Christmas-related ghost stories, but ghost stories nonetheless. And I do have a couple books here that I want to show you. The first one is this anthology book called The Oxford Book of Ghost Stories. There is a lot of great stuff in here, and I'll just read some authors if I can find the table of contents here for you. One of my favorite short stories is in here. It's by Amelia B. Edwards, and it's called The Phantom Coach. If you have the time, there is a really, really great video on YouTube of this story that somebody created with shadow puppets. It is amazing. The tone, the atmosphere is beautiful. Do yourself a favor and watch it. Bram Stoker, obviously, a little bit later in the Victorian era. H.G. Wells is in here. Henry James, the famed author for Turn of the Screw. Yeah, so great, great authors in this anthology book. But my favorite ghost story author goes to this man right here, M.R. James, Montague Rhodes James. A lot of his ghost stories are antiquarian in nature, meaning they kind of relate to the past, and I love that. So there you go, some more ghost stories if you're interested in looking into it further. Have a spooky Christmas.